We're live. Oh my gosh.
Excellent. So, welcome everybody to another episode of Hollywood Kitchen.
Yes.
I'm so excited today. We have producer Tracey Mercer. She's
Ooh.
a producer in film and television, and she does a terrific podcast I have been lucky enough to be on.
We have been lucky enough to have her.
Thank you. Called My Favorite Shitty Movie.
Yep.
And I think I surprised you. We talked about Kingpin from 1996.
I was expecting some 1930s, 40s masterpiece that wasn't, and no, instead we went Kingpin.
Yeah, I kind of had to pull something out of my hat that was a little different. But Tracey, as it turns out, is not only a friend, but she is a huge Greta Garbo fan. And I've had a very long wish list of recipes I want to make and standalone episodes because hello Annette did make Garbo's meatballs for the Oscar cook-along in 2021.
Nice.
But I felt she definitely deserves a standalone hour at least. So this is our chance to finally do that.
I'm so excited. She's absolutely my favorite, actually movie star of all time. I think she's the
Oh, wow.
ultimate movie star. I think she set the stage, which I know we'll talk a little bit about her career, but just singular. No one like her.
I agree. So first, what we'll do is we'll talk about a Garbo 101, like how you first saw her and why she is worth discovering for today's audiences. Then we'll get the Swedish meatballs started so I can get that out of the way. I'm a little worried about close-up getting involved with this.
Yes, there's an obstacle course of wires here that
There's
I feel it could be a little Catherine Zeta-Jones from like Entrapment coming. We'll see what happens. It's gonna be fun.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot happening.
But so tell me, when did you first discover the work of Greta Garbo?
I can tell you exactly. I even brought Sharon to help. So this is a book called Grand Illusions. My grandmother got this. Is of course Garbo as Mata Hari on the front cover. And I was so young when she gave it to me. I was still putting books like Tracey, yeah. So I was in second grade and I got this book, and it basically has a lot of beautiful black and white pictures from the golden era of Hollywood. And I just could never seen anything like this, especially that face. And, with all due respect to Helena Troy, I don't know that she's better looking than Greta Garbo. I don't know that anyone was better looking than Greta Garbo. And so my grandmother, she had these weird eyebrows that never quite grew back. And I said, what was that about? She's like, well, we all wanted to be Garbo. And so she had plucked the eyebrows a little too closely as a young girl because Garbo was her favorite. And so she would tell me these stories. Like, oh, what happened to grandma? She, her eyebrows never grew back, but she tried to be Garbo. And so then I started watching her films because my parents were early adopters. Dad had an old Betamax. And so you could get Garbo's films pretty early on. And so I was able to watch her growing up. But her pictures to me were where I first kind of, I think she's just an arresting. I mean, who else can hold that book? I mean, look at that. That's a ridiculous headdress, and yet she sells it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just thought she was just exquisite. And the more I read about her, I think I really related to her because she really is to me the first kind of modern woman as movie star. And so I guess if we're going to talk about 101, she was born in Sweden, very humble beginning. She referred to her place in Stockholm as a slum, really hard living as she was growing up, not a lot of money. And then, got a job at a department store and was spotted by a local filmmaker, Maurice Stiller, who would then bring her to Hollywood. He was a producer and director in his own right. And so she just kind of got noticed. And she did some films in Sweden. I think The Joyless Street and The Saga of Gasta Berlin, particularly. And Mr. Mayer of MGM fame saw, I think it was particularly the first of the films, and was taken with her and said, I'm going to go and I'm going to meet her. I have to bring her, maybe Moritz Stiller, but certainly the girl, as they were called. And so Stiller and Garbo got to come to Hollywood based on her performance in that. And, they basically straightened her hair and allegedly fixed her teeth, but that was it. And, she lost a little bit of weight because Hollywood's always punishing women, and became the great Garbo, like very quickly stood out. So I just thought, wow, she's amazing. And a great silence. Sweetheart. Oh, there she is.
Okay, close-up just broke some stuff on set.
Oh, close-up's getting violent. He also is a fan. And so, yeah, I just think that she went from silent films and she became this overnight sensation globally on the world stage because, of course, silent film was the universal language. We didn't have to worry about language interfering with enjoyment. Title cards could be changed out around the world. So she had a level of fame that I think is harder for people contemporarily to understand. I mean, maybe Taylor Swift, maybe, but she was that huge at her height, but also transitioned into sound, as so many of those early amazing silent film actors and actresses could not, and really did very well up until about World War II, where I think her career started to things changed, both the styles and the kinds of films we made. I think the kind of epic romances and the doomed victims and the independent woman, those kinds of stories kind of fell a little bit out of vogue when the war happened, and I think so did her career. So you also have this image of they called her the divine Garbo and the Swedish Sphinx and all these kinds of things that Hollywood PR departments would put out there. But she left Hollywood and she left very wealthy and on her own terms. And so
Yeah.
she never really aged on camera. She left at the age of like 36, 37 and never looked back. So you never see an old Garbo. It's almost like Marilyn Monroe. We never saw her, tragically in that case, get to age. So somebody who willfully leaves Hollywood at the pinnacle of their kind of success, and is kind of forever in cinematic amber as this gorgeous, amazing, but very modern woman. I find her so accessible. And I feel like if you haven't seen a Garbo movie, she perhaps more than other of stars that I know we love as well, I think she translates more to younger generations. I think she and Barbara Stanwyck, to me are very modern, very ahead of their time, but also for all time. So I just fell in love with Garbo's whole shtick. And she got away with things and was gender bending and
Oh God,
doing things before it was cool. And yeah, just a big fan.
Excellent. Well, Garbo, she was Swedish, and I found a few recipes. One of them had like 10 different kinds of fish, and I thought, well, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
I thought for our purposes today, the meatball recipe sounded really good. And of course, Annette's previously made it and can attest to how well it works. This book is practically crumbling before me, but there were a series of books they were basically food and fashion books. This is called Milady's Style Parade and Recipe Book of 1935.
And the Palace Theater in Ohio.
Yeah, and they would be associated with different movie theaters. So I have in my cabinet over there different movie theaters around the nation where these books would be distributed.
This is awesome.
And there's one of them that they have little ads for local shops in them. There's one book I have, they did a whole tribute because it had come out right after Will Rogers had died.
Yeah.
So they're really cool and they advertise upcoming movies because back then, as we'll talk about, women were the main audience for movies and they were driving the car back then in terms of the audience. And these books are a lot of fun. They have all these recipes and they have fashion layouts in them as well. So you're getting a kind of a lot here for your value. So we've got the Greta Garbo Swedish meatball recipe.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. First, we need 1 pound of round steak, which I have right here. 2 tablespoons of minced onion. 1 teaspoon of salt. Teaspoon of pepper. Milk. 2 eggs. 4 cups of cornflakes.
Cornflakes. That's the unexpected
right?
addition.
I kind of wonder if a cornflake company was somehow involved in.
Yes. So Kellogg's, Page and Kellogg.
My mom gave me this little mini chop food processor for Christmas a year or 2 ago. That thing has become so handy to me because I just poured the cornflakes in, hit a button, and they are like fine powder here, which is amazing. And then 1 cup of milk for gravy. Okay. Wow. So put meat in bowl. All right, we will do that.
Amazing.
Okay. Put meat in bowl. Add onion, salt, pepper, milk, and eggs.
Okay.
So we'll add the onion. Make sure I get all the onion out here. And then the good part is we'll get to eat the meatballs on top of Garbo.
That is the good part.
That's kind of the best way to spend a day, if you ask me. Okay, 1 teaspoon of salt. Oh, I don't have my teaspoon measurements, but I can probably eyeball it.
You can eyeball it. Julie Childs would approve.
Yeah. Salt. Pepper. Okay. Let's see, 1 1/2 cups of milk. I got whole milk. I figured that's probably best when cooking.
And that's probably what she would have had. Would have had natural real milk as opposed to our chemical milks of today.
That is true as well. Okay, so we've got 1 1/2 cups of milk right here. And the eggs. Let's see, 2 eggs beaten slightly. So I'm going to crack these eggs and add them to the mix.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay, crack the eggs.
You need this bad boy?
I think in a minute. All right, I'm gonna slightly beat them.
No, no eggs were hurt.
No eggs were hurt. Okay, pour them in here. All right, now I guess we'll mix all this together. It says roll cornflakes into crumbs. I've already made them into crumbs,
You got
basically.
that.
Add to meat mixture. Mix thoroughly and form into balls.
All right.
So I guess we'll mix the meat, the milk, the eggs, the onion, the salt, and the pepper here.
All right.
I hope I do this correctly. I don't want to mess up something Garbo would have enjoyed.
I bet she didn't cook all the time herself. I'm gonna go out on a limb there.
I doubt it. I mean, as busy as she was making films and being a big star, I doubt she did either. But I bet it's a good bet that she probably did like Swedish food though.
Oh,
because
yes.
that's her. She's extremely Swedish.
Yes. And also was like kind of into health food before it was cool as well.
Oh yeah.
A very healthy, famous for her walks, exercising. One of my favorite quotes of hers, she said, if you're gonna play, someone who's dying and weak, you have to be very strong in real life. And she would just, was a big exercise and health nut enthusiast, leading the charge. I think also
Wow.
Hollywood made her feel, she was a normal person when she came to Hollywood, and they made her reduce, as they used to say, a little bit, and she kind
Oh,
of stayed on
yeah.
those diets. But really, again, lot of fish, a lot of natural things. So,
Okay, so
all right,
all
so
right.
start folding some of this in.
Okay, so mix thoroughly and form put corn flakes into the mixture. Mix thoroughly and form into balls. Saute slowly in butter. Let me go get the butter.
All right. Carrie has strategically hidden some fruit from close up because someone might not be trusted all the time. That's what I'm learning today.
This is true. This is true.
It's a wise woman who knows her cat.
Yeah, there was one day I was eating scrambled eggs at my kitchen table, and he just walked up and just stuck his foot in the middle of my scrambled eggs.
He knows what he's doing.
Completely does. I may need your help sauteing these. I'm still not great at sauteing things.
Right.
But okay, I'm gonna go ahead and let this get
Heat it up a little.
heat it up a little bit. We use a hot plate on the kitchen table here for these episodes. So yeah. Gonna get that all ready.
So, Carrie, what was the first Garbo movie you saw, or
Oh, yeah.
image, or what made you fall in love with her?
When I was in high school, I was obsessed with two different actresses, Betty Davis and Greta Garbo. And while other girls had teen idols or boys in their locker, I had a big picture of Betty Davis from All About Eve and Greta Garbo from Nanochka, because that's how I roll. And I saw Grand Hotel, and I just remember thinking like, my God, who is this woman? And
Yeah.
kind of like my reaction was kind of not dissimilar to John Gilbert's at the beginning of Flesh and the Devil when he sees her, his jaw just drops and he just cannot believe what he's seeing. I think she probably was on the receiving end of that look on like a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I was just, in our world today, I feel like stars, they're on social media, they're all over the place, they're so exposed.
Too much information.
Yeah, and I think the more mystery, the more interest you have in them. And I think Garbo and Lon Chaney understood that better than anybody else did, because they weren't at movie premieres, they weren't all over the place, they weren't going to parties. They were so intensely private. And I think that, onion skins are in that, sorry.
No worries.
I think that fueled the interest in them. And to me, I like the mystery.
Yeah.
I don't need to know what Garbo does on her days off. I don't need to know who Garbo's day, but just the fact that she was so mysterious, that just added so much to the overall interest.
And I feel like because she was there at, really the beginning of like from the silent era to the creation of, the early golden era, we were building movie palaces and filling them with gods and goddesses on the silver screen. And she certainly fit the bill, but was very shy. And, she's famous if, she's remembered by younger generations. It's often, she said, I want to be alone. No, she didn't. She said, I want to be left alone. I want to be alone is a line from
Grand
Grand
Hotel.
Hotel. And she said, I want to be left alone. And there lies all the difference. And that she was kind of hunted and on the streets. I have older friends who used to live in New York back in the day. I was ready to shape those bad boys. And seeing her was like seeing a unicorn in New York. People would seek her out, watch her. She would antique. She would walk around. She was so famous. I read at the height of fame all the way through the end of her life. You could send a postcard to Greta Garbo, New York City, USA, and it
Wow.
would get to her because she was
She's that
person.
famous.
Yeah.
Should we start shaping these into balls and
Let's-
putting them in the butter?
Let's do it. I think the key is we want to try to keep them the same size so
Okay.
they'll cook evenly.
Okay. That's a good point.
Do you have another spoon? A little, if you want to use this, I'll use this.
You want to use that one and I'll use
this one.
one.
Right.
Okay.
Shaping by hand.
Oh boy. This was bound to happen. This was bound to happen.
Plus, it wants to get in on the
Sweetheart,
action.
baby, can you get down for mommy? Shoot.
It's not your best angle, so
Could you run point for just a minute?
I will.
Sweetheart, come off camera with mommy, okay?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Carrie's Kitchen. Our sous chef is not behaving right now. It's bound to happen.
He's a wild man.
He's just pushing your buttons.
Yeah, it's funny when I first got him. I'm not a huge salad person, but sometimes I eat Caesar salad. I made a Caesar salad. He practically flew from one end of the apartment over to the other, stuck his head in the middle of my salad. I was horrified. I called a friend and she goes, Carrie, Caesar salad has anchovy dressing.
Yeah.
And that is what is making him lose his mind right now. And I was like, oh, that I did not realize.
That explains it all.
Yeah, there's certain foods, if there's meat involved, there's certain things that will just that's kind of why today I was a little like, I'm not going to drag out these ingredients until like a minute before we go.
Wise.
Oh, these look great, Tracy.
Trying to keep them somewhat similar.
Well, let me see if anybody's watching us online. See if we're getting any comments.
It's a nice little hot plate.
Let me see if anybody's watching us. 9 comment. Danny says, I love Swedish meatballs, but that recipe looks very different from the ones I use. But hey, if it was good enough for Garbo. And Danny also says, I love Garbo, but seeing a woman of affairs at TCM blew me away.
Yes.
You know, the thing about Garbo, okay, so I've loved her. I had a big collage of her in my bedroom in college, and she was in my locker in high school. I love her very much. In addition to the mystery, she was so incredibly glamorous, but she was so unique. Like, I think other studios maybe tried to bring in exotic actresses, like say Paramount with Marlene Dietrich.
Right.
But Garbo stood apart. She really was kind of in her own category, if you will. And so many stars did not make the transition from silent to sound. But I think Garbo was such a sensation that she wasn't a character actress. She was so famous that I felt like I'm sure they had meetings saying, okay, we can't just throw her into anything. We have to very delicately handle this transition, because I think she was still making silence when no one else in Hollywood was.
Yeah,
she was the last one.
They held out as long as they could because they wanted her to have better English. They wanted her to be able to transition. So by the time she comes out with Anna Christie, you know, it's her first talkie, and they even sold it. She was such a big deal. You know, Garbo talks.
Yeah.
And if you think about like one name before Cher, before Oprah, that was Garbo.
Yeah.
Or even Karloff, the Uncanny, right? We just knew. But she would often be billed that way, but everyone was waiting to hear what she sounded like because she was so mysterious. And
Yeah.
you know, initially when she was brought over, I had read, you know, from Sweden, it was the idea that, oh, we need a vamp, which was in vogue for a lot of the women, like the Theta Bara being the most famous Hollywood construct at the time, Theta Bara being an awkward anagram for Arab death, but someone in Paramount thought that was a good idea. So she did really, really well, and they wanted someone in the tradition of Theta Bara, but Garbo was more special than a vamp. And so while the early performances are in that tradition, she very quickly emerges. I think by the time you get to Flesh and the Devil, which is where it's really cool if you watch the movie, because John Gilbert, who was kind of the heir apparent in a way to Valentino in terms of matinee idols and kind of the sexiest guy alive back in the day. You can watch John Gilbert and Greta Garbo falling in love in real time in that movie. It's one of the sexiest combinations. She and he just lay it up the screen. And if you've never seen a silent movie, if you haven't seen them together, I mean, they're like some of the greatest lovers ever, I think, on the big screen.
Set many years ago, LA Conservancy. I love Last Remaining Seats.
Same
You're on the
things,
board
same
of the
things.
LA Conservancy.
Yeah.
They showed Flesh and the Devil many years back,
Yep.
and audiences were laughing, and it made me so angry because by today's standards, it may seem over the top, but that movie was incredibly sexy.
Yeah.
Like 100 years ago, and I put myself in the time period
Yeah.
of these movies.
Yeah.
The audience clearly wasn't doing that, and I felt so frustrated
Yeah.
that they were laughing at it because it wasn't funny. It was sexy.
No.
It was hot.
Yeah,
You know?
it does. It still works. I don't know what's going on with that audience, but it's really worth seeing. And also just the scene. There's a scene where they fall in love, kind of in they're in like a garden, and you know they have a little lighting technique where it just lights up like it's like he's lighting a cigarette, and they're illuminated in the garden together, and it's just
Gorgeous.
amazing. Early cinematography triumph also too.
And Garbo, I think William Daniels was her favorite cinematographer,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Should we keep the lid on this or take it
You
off?
can steam it a little bit. I'll help it cook.
Okay.
It's gonna there's an extra towel like a.
Oh yeah, I'll bring it now.
But William Daniels loved her. She was definitely her preferred. He was definitely her preferred cinematographer. But one of the things they discovered when they did a screen test, thank you, of
Yeah.
Garbo for MGM, because her face is so perfect, there literally wasn't an angle you couldn't shoot her from. And so they realized very quickly that they could use her, like Claudette Colbert famously only wanted one side of her face, kind of mostly in every shot. If you look for that in her movies, you really see it. She leans in, you know, one side or the other. With Garbo, you could anywhere you want it. So the leading man's best side could be, you know, showcased because you could just shoot her any which way.
Oh yeah.
She was that good.
Well, she and Gilbert, I read some quote. I wish I could remember what source it was from, but it said something to the effect of Garbo changed everything for Gilbert because before Garbo, Gilbert was the seducer.
Yeah.
After Garbo, when he met her, it was he who was seduced.
Yes.
And I was like, whoa, that is a terrific quote.
Well, it's part of also, I think, her gender bending thing. I think you can't really talk about Garbo without talking about she has this great androgynous beauty to her. Can be masculine, can be intensely feminine, and really worked for women as much as she worked for men. In fact, more women really liked Garbo in some ways.
Yeah.
And Garbo always had better box office receipts overseas. And so a lot of her films made their bulk of their money overseas. They did well here, but women really liked her. Which is interesting because she definitely she was one of the few people that got away with open mouth kissing back in the day. You know, and my favorite of hers, I don't think it's her best film, but it's the one I can watch repeatedly, is Queen Christina.
I was just gonna bring that up. Oh my gosh, that's a terrific movie.
It's so progressive, even by today's standards. So Garbo, huge silent star, transitions to talkies as unlike most anybody else. Still huge at top of her game, wants more money, can demand anything she wants. Her contract rounds up. She goes back to Sweden and she's at the top of her game. And Mayer's not wanting to pay what she's asking for. So she goes back to Sweden.
I think I go home
I
now.
think I go home now. She waits for him to come to her. And then wouldn't you know it, she says, if I'm going to come back, I want to do Queen Christina, who was a great Swedish queen. The problem for Hollywood mores back in the day was she was famously a lesbian queen. And Mayer's like, we're not casting our biggest star as a lesbian queen at a MGM, but what are you talking about? We should probably turn these around a little bit.
Oh, they're looking good, Tracey.
And so she said, well, that's what I want. So basically she bowed to his whim. And she's like, oh, and another thing.
Oh, they're getting burned a little bit on the
Yeah,
bottom.
we got to make sure we turn these babies.
Okay, that was my bad.
It's an experiment. So literally, she said, and another thing, if I'm going to come back, by this point, John Gilbert was drinking himself to death, hadn't been a leading man in many years. Some believe Mayer purposely set up rumors that he had a feminine or high-pitched voice, and that's why he didn't transition from silence to talkies. But the truth was he did not. He had a very masculine voice and he was theater trained. And so she demanded that John Gilbert, her famous lover, but also the big movie star that gave, you know, her start together, appearing with him in Flesh and the Devil. She's like, he's going to be my leading man. You're going to bring him back to the studio. Yeah. Allegedly, he got as sober as he could, got back into shape. And so sooner than you would know it, Queen Christina gets made. They code whatever was going on with the real queen. They have Garbo strutting around as an unmarried queen dressed like a man in leather pants. But she fills out really well. Openly French kissing her female maid.
Right? That movie is so
You're like,
bold.
okay. And then he gets to show up on camera. And so forever and a day, you can hear once and for all that gorgeous voice of John Gilbert. He's gorgeous. You can hear him. And they get
Love
to be
him.
screen lovers again. The fourth and final film they would make together. And sadly, he died not long after that. But he kind of got that last big epic hit because of Garbo, which I always thought was kind of a generous gesture she made. A lot of people sometimes thought she was cold, or I think allegedly he maybe had an affair on her when they were together and she never quite forgave him, depending on who you believe. But she could do this for him, and she did. And so Queen Christina, I think, is really remarkable. And one of my favorite things, because they had done these three films in silence together, when the gimmick is that she's the queen, she sneaks out of the castle late at night, she wants to see the constituents that she's actually supposed to be leading, and she sneaks into a town, goes into a pub, is drinking beer, and you have to believe that everyone thinks that Greta Garbo is a man. As you like it, you just go with the storyline. And so they wind up, she and Gilbert, sharing a room overnight. Then he discovers very quickly she's all woman and not the guy that she was purported to be. They clearly hook up and have sex that night. The camera cuts away and we wake up the next morning, and I'd read it was Garbo's idea. The morning after they've first been together, they play it silent, like one of their silent film scenes. And so for a modern audience seeing it for the first time, it might be, why are they not talking? Why she walks around the room and looks at things, and they look at each other, and it's this really sexy, just erotic kind of thing. And then finally he breaks the silence with that great voice of his. He's like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm memorizing this room. I'm going to spend long hours in this room. And it's like, oh my God. I mean, these guys are forever. But that it was a grace note of her idea for her to play a silent scene again with her silent film love. I just thought, oh, it's just a nice little beat. So if you're watching Queen Christina, it might stick out a little bit for a modern audience, but that's the reason behind the way that was, why it was there, and her idea to kind of employ that as a device, which I just think is such a cool cinematic moment.
I do too. And the final shot of that film, when she's on the bow of the ship and that
Yes.
close up of her face, that is one for the ages.
It is. And it's funny, there used to be a rule at MGM where I think it was either like 5 or 7 seconds, something like that. They never let the camera hang on her face more than that because they wanted you to keep wanting to look at her. But that last shot in Queen Christina, it starts far away and it gets closer. And like Carrie's saying, she's at this gorgeous kind of ship. She almost becomes like the woman who's on the front of like an old buccaneer kind of ship. And she's like frozen. And a lot of people think, my God, the look on her face. She closes this movie with one look. And famously, they're like, what was the direction? What were you thinking of? And she's like, oh, nothing. The director told me not to think of anything, just to be a blank slate. But the way the camera saw her, you read what you want to into her reaction to what happens, without giving a spoiler alert away, to end the film, what she has to sacrifice to be herself. Powerful. And it still works.
It still works to this day. And that's one of those movies. I think there's some stars you can see on a smaller screen and they don't lose as much of that power. Garbo, if you can see her films on a big screen, my God, you must.
Yes.
Because the power of that image. I can't imagine how audiences in 1934 must have reacted to that final shot in Queen Christina.
Oh my God.
I mean, it is just incredible.
And she's very forthright about convictions. Before she goes in and meets Gilbert, she's getting all the pressure from the patriarchy again, because I think Garbo's so modern. So you must get married, you must have an heir, you can't do this, you cannot die an old maid. And Garbo famously turns around on her, oh, I have no idea, Chancellor, I intend to die a bachelor. And you're like,
yes,
whoa, you're saying this and what? And it just works on a lot of levels. And I think a lot of queer audiences have found that film, and it means a lot. And it was very progressive in its day. It still is.
Yeah.
And I think I've always been interested in Garbo and Dietrich. To me, are very similar.
Yeah.
Glam gals, Hollywood constructs, both brought over here. In Dietrich's case, from Germany with Joseph von Sternberg, who directed her, obviously Blue Angel, huge internationally. And then they came to Hollywood together. And then Maurice Stiller, who brings, Garbo over. But I feel like there's something about Garbo that is more mysterious, that you can't quite grasp, whereas Dietrich seemed to want to be the star more and leaning into that, and really knew her lighting. And I think with Garbo, there's an aloofness and like the part of the mystery you were talking about,
Yeah.
but you can't take your eyes off her. Whereas Dietrich seemed to want it more. And I think they're an interesting juxtaposition of the great glam gals of the era, who were also both great actresses, I would argue. Um, but they were both constructs of a system, and both radically changed to look the way Hollywood thought they should look, but then they themselves created beauty trends that American women would try to copy. I mean, famously, there was an article I read, it was fun at the time when Garbo made it really big, she started straightening her hair.
Mhm.
And hairdressers were worried because perms and the bobs and the shorts were very bob. Like, you're going to put us out of work. Everyone wants to have straight hair like Garbo. There was like concerned hairdressers everywhere. Like, not everyone needs to not have a perm. And I just think like whatever she did, people copied it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the clothing and she always played exotic women, I feel like. And I love her titles like the single standard, early Carrie Bradshaw,
Yeah.
and you were saying, and I think it's a really good point. Women were often making more, the movie star gals were making more money than the movie star men. They often got top billing in a society where women were not exactly equal, didn't have bodily autonomy, sort of like now, in some places. And I think it's interesting that these women were commanding more paychecks, they were bringing more people in. But here's Garbo, who is often playing like the single standard is another title, right? Where she's either, or Camille, she's probably the
Oh, I
three
love
best Camille
Camille.
you're
Oh,
ever gonna have. But it's like she's the courtesan who makes good, or it's the Susan Lennox, Anna
mhm.
Christie, Anna Karenina. I mean, she's playing women who are in the titles, and I think we don't have that today.
No.
It's very rare if it's not a biopic that you have the name of a woman in a title, much less a megastar like that. And so in a way, her films are more progressive, and I think she's fighting the system. It's like Susan Lennox is like, what, she leaves somebody on on their wedding day, joins the circus. Um, Years before Goldie Hawn's Private Benjamin leaves Armand Assante at the altar, Garbo's doing it. When divorce was not exactly a word you could say in polite company, but she's making films about these kind of topics. And I just think that also makes her more accessible to a modern audience, maybe than, like, we love Betty Davis, we love Joan Crawford, but to me, they were a little more melodramatic. And I think Garbo's style of acting, her naturalness, what she could do with just changing her eyes, and she's very subtle. She's not as
Oh, yeah.
mannered. It is in some ways that naturalness. I know Gregory Peck once gave an interview where he thought she was the first method actress in a way, because she was really just playing the part and not exaggerating from pantomime or vaudeville or early cinema. She just came with this naturalness because she had studied in Stockholm. So I just think she was always kind of ahead of the curve, and that cumulatively adds up with her body of work. She's just more modern, I think, than a lot of the other gals.
I agree. And I think with her and Dietrich, the fact that they were imports from overseas, I think that made the gender bending a little more palatable for Americans. Because if
Yes.
an American actress had
Yeah.
run around in trousers or
Yeah.
men's suits, I think it would have been a lot more
Yeah.
outrageous of them. You know what I mean? I mean, Hepburn did that to a degree. But
Yeah.
I think for them, it's like, oh, well, she's German. What are you going to do? She's
Yeah.
Swedish. I think they got away with maybe a little bit more pushing that line
Yeah.
because of where they were from. And one thing I've always loved about Garbo is how not desperate she was.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if she didn't like something,
Yeah.
I think I'd go home. I mean, she didn't have, and she would have done it too, had they not
Yeah.
negotiated at all costs.
Yeah.
I think she would have been perfectly happy to be like, bye-bye, MGM, I'm going to be back in Sweden, and just done that.
Yeah.
She wasn't like, I'm just saying that, but I'm really desperate. Like, no way.
Absolutely. And I think she enjoyed her privacy and her status, but then famously, Jackie Kennedy, invited her to the White House. I mean, sadly, it was, I think, weeks before JFK was to be assassinated, but she talks about it to friends who've written about, like, that was a magical night where suddenly, Jackie Kennedy is welcoming her, JFK is welcoming her, she's at the White House. In fact, I brought this just because I thought, again, you're looking at someone like Greta Garbo, who really retires, 36. But I found this original Look magazine. Look and Like Life used to be the big, but this is like, she's on the cover at 65. She hadn't worked for 3 decades, but she's still commanding covers because she's this mystical character. Like, what is Garbo at 65? Because she hadn't worked. In fact, famously, when she was gonna come back, And there's a screen test. You can go online and say Greta Garbo screen test. It was thought to be lost, but I think Gene Basinger and Kevin Brownlow found it in the 90s. And it's her in her early 40s, and she clearly could have had years and years of work
Yeah.
had she wanted to. And you can watch it, and it's kind of fun because they have her turning to the left, to the right, doing different angles, and so you capture her laughing, which is not exactly the brand she's known for. And it's just wonderful. But I also feel like, again, you never got to see her on age in an actual film. And I think when she leaves on her own terms in that early, it just makes her legendary anyway, even without the body of work and I think the progressive themes and um, films that she made.
Because I've often said this before. I think some stars, when they die young and or retire young,
Yeah,
they are frozen in time forever, is
Yeah.
the peak of their youth,
Yeah.
their beauty. They don't get old, they don't make really bad film.
Yeah.
They kind of leave at the absolute peak.
yeah,
And I think there's something kind of romantic about that for people, that frozen in
Yeah.
time sort of thing. Because like Dietrich, for example, I keep comparing the two of them, but there's a reason, because they have so much in common.
they
But
do.
but Dietrich kept going, and she transitioned into character roles, and then she did cabaret, and she kept
Vegas.
Vegas. I mean, she kept going and going and going.
Right.
But Garbo was not a singer like Dietrich. Garbo was not a nightclub entertainer like Dietrich. She didn't have it in her to do that. And it's also interesting to note the way they handled World War II, because Garbo's final film was The Two-Faced Woman, which was a total financial and critical disaster. And then after that, she basically,
Reteaming her with Melvin Douglas from Nanochka, which was a huge hit.
and she basically sat out World War II. And it's because she was Swedish, maybe it's a neutrality thing. But then Dietrich, on the other hand, was like wearing a uniform, working as a spy, entertaining men all over Europe with the troops. I mean, I think that was Dietrich at her finest, was World War II.
Yeah.
Because she was a soldier, she was a song and dance woman. That's kind of, to me, where you see the biggest diversion in their past. And you've got one that will do nothing and the other that can't do enough.
And you had Dietrich, who was certainly with a lot of men, and had children. And Garbo never married and never had children, so they couldn't write tell-all books like Maria Riva, waiting for mom to die, and said a lot of things, kind of like Christina Crawford, waiting for people to not be there, and then said a lot of things in their books about their mothers who cared so much about their image and pristine. So I always feel a little like, oof. But my favorite, Stanwyck, and my other favorite, Garbo, they did not have kids, so there wasn't the tell-all.
I think Stanwyck adopted a son with Frank Fay, but
that was part of the arranged
marriage. Okay.
But they didn't have those kind of kids, and it's just interesting though. But I think it's Dietrich really, really wanted it. And I think Garbo just, I don't, like you said, I think not so much.
She could have just walked away and been perfectly fine doing other things.
But she's such a major star, even if you're a Gen Xer, right? When you think about Madonna and Vogue, who's the first star she names in Vogue? Garbo. She starts there because she's the best and the biggest.
And it's interesting how when the sound era first arrived, MGM did this Hollywood review of 1929, and they put all their top stars, they kind of made them do bits in the review, but they didn't. There's two major omissions, Garbo and Chaney.
Yeah.
And Chaney at least got a song and dance number. Lon Chaney's gonna get you if you don't watch out. But Garbo, there was not even an acknowledgement of Garbo. And again, that was on purpose, because I don't think there's any way on earth she would have agreed to be in an early sound musical review. I don't see a world where that would have happened.
No, in fact, one of the famous publicity, you could Google this too if you're at home watching. You could say Garbo Lion, and there's a famous picture where she's next to Leo, and if Carrie is like Garbo's doing that, like she is so not wanting to be there, they couldn't use it. They couldn't use it because she's like, I'm not standing next to this lion. And then apparently it was the same lion that like attacked somebody like a week later, and you're like, listen to your actors. Same thing happened with Swanson, right? The lion, she's like, oh, Mr. DeMille, this lion's looking very hungry.
A picture's worth 1,000 words. And when you see Garbo in those super early PR photos,
oh, she's so uncomfortable.
And there's no hiding that. No amount of acting skill can hide that level of discomfort.
No, but there's also a couple that like where she's wearing like USC kind of like men's jerseys, and she's very androgynous. And if you are part of the LGBT community, you will recognize some of the stuff she's doing. But there you go. So you put those up there.
And so what are your favorite Garbo films?
Well, Flesh and the Devil,
Mhm.
that was actually one of the first silent films I think I'd ever seen. And I
Oh,
just was so taken in. It's a really simple story. It's really a love triangle. She's the bad girl. She's still playing the vamp. She breaks up, John Gilbert and his best friend. They were war buddies. They come back.
Lars.
They grew up together, Lars. They come back together, and then along comes Garbo. And Gilbert just wants her. And it breaks up the friendship. In fact, they're on the aisle of friendship, where
Friendship.
there's a duel and all this kind of. I just think it's so old school, but it's a study in looks. Like she just owns the screen in a way I think very few women ever have since or before, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think that Ninotchka,
Mhm.
because it really taking her image and then turning it on its head. Again, if Anna Christie is Garbo talks, this is like Garbo laughs. And with Ninotchka, which I also think is something to bring up. This comes out in 1939. And you can see it's like the comedy that kids, the commissar, I think is what they say. Yeah, the commissars. And this comes out in 39, and it was one of the first films, certainly in Hollywood, that takes on Stalinism, Russia. There's like lines that are thrown for like a cheap joke, except there's a lot of death behind them. But I was a very big fan of your mass trials in Russia. I know there'll be fewer but better Russians. And they're like, oh my God, like Stalin is having a thing literally like 1940, a year after Ninotchka, Chaplin gives us The Great Dictator, where he's warning the world against Hitler in a comedy. I would argue that Lubitsch, with Wilder writing, with Ninotchka, is warning us about Stalin and what's going on at the same time. And again, you have to look at 1939 and 1940. You have immigrants who come to this country, made good, and are making Hollywood films for the global stage, where they are taking pot shots at Stalin, and Hitler. And, America obviously waited several years before we got back into the war. But I feel like these were pop culture hits, highest grossing films, the top films of the year with big movie stars saying things very political, but through comedy. Um, I find those films very interesting. So favorite, I definitely Ninotchka. I mean, and Queen Christina for sure. Um, and I think her silent films, like I love. She and Gilbert were immediately reteamed because of the success of Flesh and the Devil, and they did a film called Love, which was Anna Christie, the silent version, where she's opposite Gilbert. She would then do Anna Christie, the talkie version, with Frederick March some years later. So it's interesting to track her performance from silent to talkie playing the same character, I think. But I love the marketing of it was supposed to be called Heat.
Oh yeah, and they couldn't put Garbo and Gilbert in Heat.
But then they went Garbo and Gilbert because they were a big couple in real life in love was this poster. I thought that's so clever. Before there was like Benifer, there was Garbo and Gilbert. And I love that. But I think it's a really interesting look at her evolution as an actress. Although I think she's better with March and in the talkie, but yeah.
Before Benifer, actually I read somewhere that some of the fan magazines called them Gilbo garbage.
Yes, Gilbo garbage. That was not so nice.
Yeah, Pickfair, I would say Pickfair, Doug and Mary were probably the preeminent very
Yes.
first power couple. One thing I would love to see somebody out there do, I'm not the one to do it, but a history of Hollywood power couples. And not
Yeah.
just like there's one or two of them in every era, like the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s on. And
Like
not just
Burton Taylor or something like
yeah, and
that.
not just an actor and actress, but the two that are at the absolute top of their game. And also what happens when one career is up, one is down. One
Right.
wins an Oscar, the other's in a flop. When the kids come in,
Right.
when fame comes in, like how all of these moving parts affect that relationship. And I think, because let's face it, except for Woodward and Newman, all the other ones have ended in divorce or who knows what else.
Or multiple marriages to each other again.
Yes. So it would be an interesting kind of examination of the power struggles and the ups and downs of that life.
And also like Irving Thalberg and Norma Shearer. So you've got someone who's the boy genius who's developing the Dream Factory at MGM, married to Shearer, who's literally one of the top stars. I mean, Shearer was like, I guess she beat Garbo actually for a couple Oscars. But, also she was the wife of, the guy who was literally programming for the studio as well. So she had a little bit of a heads up perhaps. But yeah, I think that would be a really fun series. And I think it's also why Hollywood can't stop making A Star Is Born. I think it's I still think the original is amazing. But how many times have we done that now? I mean, we've done, like, we've got the Judy Garland version, we've got well, Bradley Cooper just did
Well,
a
the
version.
Janet Gaynor
The Janet
version,
version. And this is Norman Maine. That's still my favorite.
that was the first official version, unless you count What Price Hollywood, and
That's true. And also the artist
Yeah.
has the same plot line.
Yeah.
And really, it's The Star is Born. It's like you're on the rise and you're on the rise. One of my favorite shots in The Artist is at the Bradbury Building in downtown LA.
Mm.
You know, she's going up, he's going down, and it's literally a visual. It's a very silent film friendly thing in the right building. That's showing the Star is Born problem of how can egos survive when one is up and one is down. Yeah, it's great. And also like Paul Byrne and Jean Harlow and that tragedy.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a lot of heartbreak with these folks, and a lot of people who, I mean, Harlow was so young when she passed too, right?
Oh
Wasn't
gosh, she's
she
26.
26?
Yeah.
So yeah, what work we didn't get to see. But I see when you talk about, like, I think Flesh and the Devil is one of the sexiest movies, but
Me too.
I think Red Dust with Harlow and Gable is like right up there. It's probably second for me of that era. Amazing.
I feel like a lot of the silent stars, they kind of had a sound person who replaced their mantle, if you will. Like I came across an article that was saying, well, Frederick March is the new John Barrymore. I think Shirley Temple was doing a lot of the type of roles Mary Pickford would have played.
100%.
I think Errol Flynn was doing the parts Fairbanks would have played. And I think in the case of Gilbert, I heard they were originally going to put him in Red Dust.
Yes.
And because of a lot of his problems, they didn't.
Yeah.
And I think Gable kind of came the
Yes.
romantic he-man
Yeah.
that Gilbert was just a few years earlier.
Right.
Like I think he was the replacement, if you will.
And early Clark Gable working with Garbo too. So like there was
Yeah.
that connection as well. Her kind of giving him a vehicle, people started noticing him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So fun. Yeah, I just there's something about the chemistry that those folks have that is just timeless. And I think because they had to be more clever because there were things they couldn't show, it might be why it's more delicious. Like I feel like Morocco, going back to Dietrich, you know, famously with the top, you know, hat and the tux,
Oh
you know,
gosh.
she's like turning on Gary Cooper, but she's also turning on the gal who she's kissing and what, and you're like, wow, it like works for everybody. And you're like, oh my God. But it wasn't as transgressive. And I think you're right. I think it's also because they were European, they were immigrants. I think, you know, we weren't as hung up. I mean, I think whatever the moral majority of the moment is. But, you know, I think of Wings, the first film to win, you know, Best Picture, you know, and good old Buddy Rogers when he loses, you know, his co-pilot. It was very Top Gun. It's Cruise to, you know, losing Goose, whatever. The Anthony Edwards character. I feel like he's dying. And so you've got like a leading man kissing, you know, his co-pilot. No one was like, oh, they're gay. It was like, we love each other. And men used to be able to show affection in that way.
Yeah.
And there was a regression, obviously. And I think we're living in a regression now, but that's another conversation. But I think back then people weren't as hung up on it. You watch Cabaret, you watch like the Weimar Republic
Oh,
versus what
God,
came
yeah.
next. And so it's interesting to track that. And I think films, particularly, you know, if they're really great, they stand the test of time, but they're always also a reflection of the time in which they were made. And I feel like, especially with Garbo and some of these other stars who, you know, admittedly were bisexual, I guess we would use that term today. It's interesting to track that. And if you're interested in that, like Vito Russo, who did The Celluloid Closet, really is still the definitive,
Yeah.
you know, voice on that. But you see these early films in the 20s and 30s, and gay audiences would have seen a different version than a typical straight audience. And these stars were very aware, either themselves personally and or they knew what they were doing. And I think there's a sexiness to that transcends those times. To me, they're more interesting than some of the films in the 50s. I'm not as into the, you know, I think kind of the straight musicals and the biblical ethics. There was something a little bit more sexy and taboo and dangerous that they were able to do in the 20s and 30s that you didn't see in the 50s.
Oh no.
And that's interesting too, because it tells us more about America at that time, when certain films were made than others. But there was way more progressive. We look at the pre-code films.
I love pre-code. Oh my gosh.
Amazing. I mean, I feel like, you know, Stanwyck especially, I love all her films, like Ladies They Talk About,
I know.
Insurance Can't Take the Money, Babyface being the most famous, Night Nurse. I mean, all of these titles are very provocative, but Stanwyck always has agency. I think, like early Garbo films, they might be punished in the final reel, but they really have a hell of a time on their way there.
Oh yeah.
And women were allowed to be single and do things in those roles, that not just kind of the Donna Reed persona in the 50s. And I think that's also why some of these early stars like Garbo will play better for a modern audience perhaps than others that come later.
I
You know?
agree. And you know what I kind of pick up on in Flesh and the Devil is the bond between Gilbert and Lars Hansen. A
Yes.
friend and I kind of called it Brokeback Mountain of
It,
1926 because you
totally,
see
yeah.
they love each other.
They
They
love
are
each
like
other.
this.
Yeah.
And there's a bond that even
Yeah.
Garbo can't break between them in that movie.
Yeah.
And there's a
Yeah.
lot of undercurrent in that
Yes.
movie of
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, even something like Gilda. I love Gilda. I don't think it
Too.
makes a lick of sense. I don't know what's going on with the tungsten. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't matter. It's Rita Hayworth put the blame on, you know, Mae, all of it. But when she's like in his face with these ridiculous, I hate you too, Johnny. I hate you so much. Sometimes I think I'll die from it. You know, she's doing all this kind of stuff. But then when Glenn, you know, Ford is on screen, you know, with the other actor, I'm like, I think they love each other, and it's inconvenient that Rita's here. And it's the same thing. I think it is Flesh of the Devil like, where you're like, huh, these men seem to have feelings. And yeah, the vamp comes in, and what does it do to these two men in the story? And yeah, it's interesting, but they were more playful. I mean, look at Cabaret. I mean, that whole era that it chronicles, but even in the 70s when there was like kind of a new American cinema and people were being more frank, um, it's interesting because I think especially Cabaret, the 72 Liza Minnelli version, like
Love them.
it's winking to the films we're talking about that Garbo did in the 30s, where there was more hedonism and less kind of uptightness, I would argue.
And some stars were just born for the pre-code and silent era. And when, like, I love Harlow, and I don't love post-code Harlow as much as I love pre-code Harlow. And then
Yeah.
some of them, their image, like some of them, like say Joan Crawford, they could adjust to whatever was going on in the world and
Yeah.
adjust themselves. Crawford, Betty Davis. But I think someone like Garbo, once the late 30s rolled around, that international
Yeah.
Woman of Mystery, it wasn't playing as well with the American
No.
audiences. And then Nanochka was a big swing. I mean, it could have
Huge.
done terribly, but it did not.
Yeah.
But then Two-Faced Woman, it just, I really don't think, on one hand, she could have tried to hang in there and keep working. I always like to speculate about what could have been.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that tough, independent, all-American woman that was embodied by Betty and Joan,
Yeah.
I just don't think Garbo,
Yeah.
that was the right time for her.
I agree.
No?
I think so. And I think also with Crawford, you know, who's got to be maybe the hardest talking lady ever. And talk about someone who wanted it, who willed herself
Yeah.
into stardom.
Oh yeah.
But and never gave up. I mean, famously, but they also, Garbo never had to go through, depending on your point of view, the indignity or the aging out on screen, whatever you want to say. But by the time, you know, you get to, you know, whatever happened to Baby Jane, you know, they're kind of playing the gargoyle, both of these, you know, amazing women of a certain era. And, you know, I think William Castle put a lot of our favorites to work, and I mean, Barbara Stanwyck again, I think, you know, also shows up as the Tinkler or whatever, but
One of those.
yeah, but yeah, but I also feel like Stanwyck figured out early on what others are kind of doing now too, which is television. So when she would go on and do Big
Yeah.
Valley and then the Thornbirds in our lifetime, she never stopped working. And, you know, she also started as we mentioned before, pre-code Hollywood all the way through like, you know, the 80s television. I mean, that's a heck of a run.
Oh gosh,
And
60
her
years.
body of work. And I always thought it was weird because Barbara Stanwyck is like a fake name, right? Or she was like Ruby Stevens. I thought, what's wrong with Ruby Stevens? That's a pretty great name.
Yeah.
But you know, she was a Ziegfeld girl, then transitions into film and then just never stopped working. And always good, always modern too. Even if she was in kind of very melodramatic films like Stella Dallas, I'm thinking of most uh, prominently, which feel dated to me, but she never feels dated to me. I always relate to her. And I love that Stanwyck also, unlike Garbo, who really was MGM in a sense property when she was working, Stanwyck was somehow able to be independent because she was so good. These directors like Capra and, you know, wanted to work with her. So she didn't have 7-year contracts, but yet she was in these great movies in a time where everyone else was usually slave to a contract, which also makes her unique in that way. So I love her career as well because she seems like she had more of a place in charting it, and she was so good that the top directors would get her out of, whatever they needed to be with her. And that also, I think, afforded her more interesting roles.
Oh yeah.
When I look at, I think almost the same year, she's doing Double Indemnity, there's like Ball of Fire that's right there. And you're like, my God, that's not a, you know, talk about range,
Oh yeah.
and I just really admire that. And whereas I think Garbo was always kind of independent, aloof, mysterious, tragic, often didn't make it through the end of the final reel.
There's just a lot of range there in terms of
No, but she just embodied these larger than life women who have very modern predicaments that we still relate to in ways that I perhaps are harder for me with like Joan Crawford. It's the shot girl makes good for a long time. But then she turns that into a middle-aged Mildred Pierce, who's still kind of the shop girl who makes pies makes good or whatever, Interesting trajectory in terms of their career.
oh, definitely. And it just seems to me that Garbo didn't need Hollywood. She was perfectly happy.
Yeah.
So I think there's some stars, and I've talked about this in the show before, that they almost have nothing else. And the career is the only thing they have, and they have to cling to it at all costs. And I think there's some that are like, I got hobbies, I got interests, I got savings, see you later, and they don't need it in the way that other people need it, if that makes any sense.
And I think with Garbo, she was so young when she was discovered and brought over. The idea that she was playing this womanly, kind of naughty girl of the world, she was like basically a teenager in her early 20s something, when she was discovered and talks about how she really hadn't experienced the world, but like very quickly was thrust into the stratosphere and was the box office draw for years. In an interesting way, but the idea that she was playing something she would not necessarily have experienced or known either. She was, grew up in very impoverished, Stockholm, and then it's like playing like Queens and Mata Hari, and it's not exactly where she came from.
Oh, definitely.
So, but really interesting, the persona. But also I think people project onto her. And it's like what you were saying, because she left so early and on her own accord, and most people can't understand that.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
when you see her, people are projecting onto her what they want.
She's a Rorschach blot.
She's a Rorschach, totally. A very pretty one.
Oh, gorgeous. Let me see if we have any more comments coming in. Let's see here.
This is smelling good in here.
It does smell so good. And I'm really surprised close-up's kind of staying sedate over there around the corner. With our Cora Sue Collins as young Garbo. I did an episode with Cora Sue, and she told me about she and Garbo were friends, and that Garbo would let her come into her dressing room, but she wouldn't let her mother, only little Cora Sue.
I love that.
And I think because maybe she was a child, she didn't have the, oh my God, it's Garbo. She didn't care, and I think that was probably a pretty huge deal in terms of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I saw a clip recently. Jane Fonda was talking about when she was a little girl and, hanging out with obviously her dad, Henry Fonda. Henry was big, had recently remarried after Jane's mom had taken her own life tragically. And so a lot of people were coming to hang out with Henry Fonda, and the new wife was interested in bringing all these people over. And Jane said, yeah, everyone ignored me. No one cared about me. I was like little Jane running around the house, except for one person. Garbo came over, and Garbo basically said, hey, how are you? Do you want to go swimming? Because she's so active and always wanting to, exercise. And Jane said, yeah. And so she went down in her swimsuit. Garbo got dressed. They walked down to wherever they were in some glamorous location, and they went swimming together as a young Jane Fonda. And Garbo apparently said to Jane, do you want to be an actress? She's like, oh no, I don't think I should be. She's like, you should think about that. You're quite beautiful. You're very interesting. You should think about being an actress. And literally Jane says, I couldn't believe it. I thought Greta Garbo said, I'm pretty, I can't. And she just lost her mind. But she's like, she was the only one who was really nice to me. I was just seen as the kid in the room. Garbo looked at me, invited me to hang out, and spent time with me. And I thought, for someone who didn't have her own children, you hear these stories about her being kind to children and not so much to other adults unless they were in her inner circle.
I love being the cool aunt.
Yeah.
Like, I am good at that.
Yeah.
That I can do. Let's see. Suzanne Rinaldo says, Garbo didn't crave attention the way Dietrich did.
Yes.
Garbo didn't need money in life like Dietrich did. Garbo invested in real estate. Yeah.
And art.
Yeah, and art. Let's talk about that. Let's show some pieces here.
Yeah.
You brought over, this is
Yes.
pretty amazing
Yeah.
right here. Tell us about this.
So this is the Sotheby's auction catalog, basically, of Garbo's house in 1990 after she passed. So you can see kind of what her home looked like. And they break down all of her art. She had a lot of Renoirs, original Renoirs in her home, but like millions of dollars. But you can see like the pictures and the colors that she seemed to gravitate towards. And there's a couple shots in there of what her home looked like. And, you know, and it was over kind of looking over in New York or the river, which probably reminded her of Stockholm. But you can see how she lived. I mean, very old world in a sense, and beautiful. But she was a collector her entire life. I think at the time of her passing, her art collection was worth maybe as much as her real estate. But just a really phenomenal woman. But I think built this kind of proscenium arch to see the world and watch things and live like a queen. At the end of the day, really didn't seem to be that interested in a lot of people. And you know, she had her core friends, and they would walk together and they would shop together, but there was an isolation, and by choice,
A tight circle.
a tight circle.
Let's see. Danny says, did Garbo ever meet fellow Swede Ingrid Bergman? Never saw a photo of them together, but I know their Hollywood years overlapped a bit.
That's true, actually. It's a great question.
That is a really good question.
I would imagine they would have had to if it wasn't that big a
I would think they'd have like
circles.
an expatriate circle of
Yeah.
people maybe that hung out and had brunch or
And both
talked.
nominated for Oscars, and there's the Academy, and I could see
Yeah.
that. It's a real shame that Garbo never won an Oscar. She was
Oh.
given a career Oscar, and in true to form, she didn't bother to show up to get it. She's like, I don't do that. But she's like, I don't need to do that. But I always feel like they do that. Like my favorite Barbara Stanwyck too. You know, she got the honorary, but she never got the Oscar herself.
Every year I do this Oscar cook along, and every year I have a theme. And for a couple of times we've had the theme, they should have won, they didn't, and that stinks, or never even nominated. And as much as I enjoy the Oscars and I have fun with them,
They get it wrong a lot.
they get it wrong a lot. And also, what do you say when some people have them that are so darned unworthy and time has borne that out?
Yeah.
And other people who time has borne out the fact that they were so richly deserving, have such a strong legacy. So
Glenn Close needs an Oscar. Annette Bening, Sigourney
Yes.
Weaver,
Yes.
Oscars.
Great.
Sharon Stone, let's do this. Yeah,
Yes.
it's a shame. I mean, you don't want to cast aspersions, you know, let's say, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow, but like she has one, so it's okay. Let's get one for Glenn Close. Like I just feel like let's spread the wealth.
Yes, that is just a dadgum crying shame.
I know. I'm never gonna get over that because his Paltrow's certainly given great performances, but I just felt like that year she won for Shakespeare in Love. Kate
That was
Blanchett,
funny.
Kate Blanchett as Elizabeth, for the age that performance, I was like, oh my gosh. But again, it's like Garbo and Stanwyck. They never got to win for some of their best performances. The sin that Garbo didn't win for Camille.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and Garbo admitted she thinks her best movie was Camille.
And there's no way she would have shown up to the Oscars. There's absolutely no
No.
way. She wouldn't even have pulled a Brando and sent someone else to accept it. I just don't think she would have
And
done.
like our friend Joan Crawford, she's like, I'm in my sick bed, but I'll make him bring the Oscar to me in my bed. And she got to upstage the entire Oscar show when she won for Mildred Pierce. There's famous shots of her in bed going, I won, it looks like I've won. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, she's so good. She's like, we'll command this.
That was the best PR strategy that could ever have. She was a PR genius. She could have done that if she hadn't have been an actress. But yeah, it's fun, but I don't think you can take it too seriously.
No,
because
I mean,
it's
nice to be acknowledged by your peers, but I also feel like people like Sigourney and Glenn Close, they're New York actors. They're not part of the Hollywood clique, and I do feel sometimes people vote for their. I mean,
I'm friends.
I'm a member of a TV Academy, and sometimes I'm like, oh yes, my friend worked on that. I'm like, wait a second, but was that the best? You know, you have to check yourself sometimes in terms of who are you voting for and why.
Great.
But I also think, you know, sometimes people make a lot of money and, you know, the right role comes up. Like, I feel like, you know, Julia Roberts was the it girl, and then the perfect role for her, that Erin Brockovich, her version of Norma Ray. And I think people really wanted that for her. I don't know. I think Robert Downey Jr. has given some great performances. I don't know that Oppenheimer was his best, but that's what they gave to him. Paul Newman famously snubbed, so he wins for Color of Money. I don't know, when Cool Hand Luke and HUD and Butch and Sundance and The Sting.
Seriously.
If those films are out there, I think we could argue those are stronger performances than perhaps his in Color of Money, even the original Hustler.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's about the timing of that. Like I always felt Cher didn't even get nominated for Mask, but then the next
Right.
year she wins for Moonstruck. Now, I think we all, when we hear Moonstruck, we probably think snap out of
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah.
Are we talking about that performance, or are we talking about Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction still?
Mm, I,
Glenn loses to Moonstruck because
mm,
Cher got screwed over the year before, so we're always playing catch up.
I
And
agree.
I would feel like, oh, I want them all to win who deserve it. But I'm just like, sometimes it's for the wrong role.
Oh yeah, I agree.
It's a bummer.
I agree. Like Pacino won for Scent of a Woman. Out of all the films
I've
that
only
man has
Pacino.
done.
Yeah, exactly that. You're like, and it was a good performance, but I mean, he was in The Godfather. I mean, Scarecrow, Straight Time, it's like
Dog
Straw
Day
Dogs, Dog Day
Afternoon.
Afternoon, and they're like, son of a woman. It's like, oh, okay.
It's like, what can you do?
Yeah, I mean, at least he won. At least he won. But yeah, it is interesting when those things happen.
With the passing of Robert Redford recently, it's kind of got me thinking about what an incredible legacy he and Newman both left, because both those men were megawatt, gorgeous movie stars. They could have coasted on the looks alone for pretty much their lives. They
Totally.
did not. I mean, Redford founded the Sundance Institute, has given a tremendous amount of opportunity and voice to so many artists and filmmakers.
Yep.
Newman, all the charitable work he has done with his food products, with all
Yeah.
of his charitable endeavors. It's just thinking about the cumulative legacy of Butch and Sundance, if you will, is really
Yeah.
astounding.
And I think also, like a lot of artists, I think both Newman and Redford, even though I think there's a generation difference, there's like a 10-year differential between the two, but they both lost children. They
Mm,
both suffered tremendous personal loss. And I think like a lot of artists that channel loss and feelings into performance in their art, I think those men also wanted to give back and knew how
yeah.
fortunate they were, and that they cared so much about the media. And as you say, they're both so pretty, they could have kept doing the same thing. I think Brad Pitt also, who to me seems like a younger version of Redford, in that passing of the baton from A River Runs Through It, and things like that, and the eating and the pose. I mean, there's a lot of similarities that Brad's talked about in terms of looking up to Redford and growing up loving his films as well. But you could suggest that Brad Pitt could have completely done Legends of the Fall 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, like, oh, Tristan, right? But instead, he will mix it up and he'll do cool indies, or he'll take chances, like something like Ad Astra, which is a real art film, but with his starring in it, it gets made. Using his stardom to do things like 12 Years a Slave and get a studio to make that in this era. That's him cashing his chips in a sense to say, I support this filmmaker and I want this story to be made.
Yeah.
Um, I really admire, I think Redford did that too. There would be the for every Jeremiah Johnson, he could do Illegal Eagles, like, one that's pop and then one that's really meaningful, and have fun in all of them. And I think that is also why you have a career as varied as Redford and Newman. And it's a shame they only worked together those two times. But if you're only going to make two films together, make it The Sting and Butch and Sundance. I mean, these guys
That's
together,
right.
it's magic. Um, but yeah, I really think there's a humanity to them. And not to say that modern stars, I don't think we have stars in this way anymore.
No.
There's too many channels, there's too many options. I think younger generations are on phones, a little bit more gross generalization, apologies. Than some of us who are like, I don't want to see Lawrence of Arabia on my cell phone. It's like, I don't, is that Omar Sharif? Like, oh, there it is. Doesn't work, right? But you want to see certain films with a vista of that. And I think Garbo, again, as we talked about at the top of the show, she was a goddess, then you were projecting her in film palaces.
Mm.
So what she fit there. And I don't know that we liberated women from goddessdom, and everyone started playing more kind of normal people. And I think it was Joan Crawford's, oh, if you want the girl next door, go get the girl next door,
Yeah, don't accept.
there was a persona and a larger than life and aloofness like Garbo, that the other stars had, that I don't necessarily always find current. Like I was really fortunate to produce a film with Diane Keaton, who is a
Oh,
national treasure. Five Flights Up. It was Morgan Freeman and Cynthia Nixon and and she will do interviews because she understands the assignment, but she usually talks about the film. She's really kept her private life more private. And if you've read her books, she talks about growing up and her mother Dorothy and being in Orange County and how she found connect with Woody Allen, started, to go from the stage play of Hair to like Annie Hall and winning the Oscar and all this kind of stuff. But she doesn't really talk a lot about, there's a mystery about her. We think we know who Diane is, but you don't really know that much. And if you do, it's from the 70s, mostly the famous guys she used to date, because they spoke about it more than she, the Warren Beatty's of the world and all this kind of stuff. And I think there is a bit of a mystery to her too, but I think she's that generation that I really connect with more than some of the up and comers that, the influencers are harder for me. But I feel like, God, that's my age showing. I should be more charitable to, like, I guess this 30-second thing of you talking is interesting. But when I see Babyface and I see Barbara Stanwyck literally sleeping her way up the building to get, and one of my favorites, I think, on the Babyface famously opens with her, right? You get the idea that very quickly that her dad, who ran this scurvy bar in a seaside town, was maybe whoring out his daughter.
Oh yeah, much says so.
Yeah,
I think.
she's
Yeah.
like, she throws the coffee on the guy. She snaps one night, burns down, presumably dad in his own bar, heads to the big city, height of the Depression, goes in. Do you have any experience? Oh, brother. Crosses the legs.
20.
And then she comes up and down. And then one of the guys that she says no to, which I think is great, is a Mary. It's the John Wayne. I think it's the only time a woman ever said no to John Wayne on screen. So go, Barbara. But it's just like this delicious, like, wow, she is a working girl in all the sense in Depression era America, figuring it out. And if you see the uncut version of Babyface, which you can now get,
yes,
there's an older gentleman who is literally preaching Nietzsche to her and saying these, like, use men. You're like, how? Of course they cut this out in America. The Europeans got to see Babyface intact. But you're like, this is so, I couldn't do this today. This would be so like provocative. But here she's doing films like that back in the day, very impressive. And I think Garbo too. And with all the gender bending and all the winks to everything going on, like, she just works for everybody. I don't care where you are on the Kinsey scale. We don't have that kind of enigmatic, I think, person right now.
No, because everything is out there. Everything is out in the open. And I think there's something to be said for privacy, for aloofness. I love her. I did want to show one thing. My friend Nicole, who used to run a brick and mortar store, Paper Moon Vintage. I think she now has a booth at Vintage Vortex if you live in LA. Anyways, I found this scrapbook in her store. We should probably get the meatballs away from it so they don't get scraps of paper in them. But this is a scrapbook I found in her store. As you can see, it's very fragile and very delicate, but it was so clearly assembled by a huge fan of Garbo. And it's filled with pictures of Greta Garbo that people cut out of magazines and newspapers.
It's so wonderful.
I love this so much. This is kind of one of my favorite things. So,
yeah.
And these are so neat because anytime you can find these kind of fan magazines, or fan scrapbooks, try to get them because someone put a lot of work into that clearly at the time as well.
Yeah, and the fan magazines also, I think, are such a great window into that time period.
Oh, yeah.
The trends, what we're copying, what we were exploiting. And there was an idea that I think a lot of, especially the studios, formed mostly by immigrants again. I think everybody but Zanuck really formed these massive studios. And so it's the great literature of their time. They're like, well, maybe I didn't read it, maybe I should read it again, but I can use that and make the film version out of it. And I just feel like they really created the template for the archetypes of heroes and genres that we're still working off of today. I think of someone like Frances Marion, who was one of the most successful screenwriters of all time, but a woman writing these stories. So when you think about, like, Douglas Fairbanks started off doing kind of quirky comedies. He became the first action hero, but Frances Marion understood how to write for him and create these, dynamic, you got Thief of Baghdad and the Black Pirates and Robin Hood and, but he was transitioning from comedy, which he was good at, but he really found it as an action hero leading man. But Frances Marion could do that. She could work for, like, Valentino. She could work Garbo. Like, she understood how to take these larger than life kind of personalities that were created in a factory, but then give them these huge epic storylines to play. And I just think that, we're still writing off of what she kind of created too. And then I think people forget that women really, in the beginning of Hollywood, we were very powerful directors, we were very powerful writers, we were the stars that were commanding more money and bringing people in. And then it started to become a mega business. And then you started to see that change. And then, it was harder to get to female directors. You had someone like a rare Dorothy Arzner or an Ida Lupino, but it was few and far between until you got a little further along in the studio system. And that reversion is kind of what we're talking about, also just tying it back to Garbo in terms of the gender bending. And there was perhaps a lot more open minds early on, and then there's the reversion. We saw that, I think, with just women working behind the scenes as well in Hollywood. So it's interesting to me to see like some of the biggest stars, their personas were created by Frances Marion. And I think she's a name that more people should know.
Absolutely. And Carrie Beecham, our dearly departed Carrie Beecham, wrote a terrific book, Without Lying Down, Frances Marion and the Women of Early Hollywood.
Yes.
And that's really one of the seminal books on film history.
It is. And there's a great documentary by great female director Leslie Lincoln Glatter on that book, Without Lying Down. And so you can see the women in the film clips, and it really follows the book. And it's another one I wish that would get a re-release.
Oh, definitely.
But it's just it was such a magical time. Or people like, we love obviously Valentino, Lady in Black. But someone like June Mathis and like, the friendship and they literally in eternity next to each other because of her openness and in a sense, the great lover of abandoned really, and not had a great love life in his own life from what we read, but that he did have these friends that did care about him, but someone like June who took care of him. Interesting.
Absolutely. I talk about her on my tour because I really think she deserves a lot of credit for his stardom, because she saw what he was, being this character actor is the villain, the stereotype because of his foreign looks.
Right.
But she saw not just what he was, she saw what he could be.
Yeah.
And that's a hugely different way of looking at things.
Yeah.
And I think it's funny on the tour because some days I get people on it and they go, wait a minute, women wrote movies back then? And I'm like, hold my beer. Let me tell you what, because I'm like, absolutely they did. And that always surprises people to know that.
Yeah. Because I think it's also the age of the people saying that, right? Because it seems recent to them, but it's like, no, actually women were kind of at the early pioneer. People forget, but like literally Mabel Normand taught Charlie Chaplin how to direct film.
Yeah.
So that's true. So, but we tend to forget these things. So I think it's really important what you do also, because you keep their living memories, I think, in front of us, and we put that. And I think younger generations, if you just give them a shot, if you just watch some of these movies, watch Queen Christina, it will resonate with you. Ninotchka, still hilariously funny. I think her Anna Christie is remarkable. I have to say, I love Anna Christie as well. But I think there's something magic. I think about this like when I watched Casablanca, for example. It's like, X number of years ago now, these stars went to a little airport hangar in Burbank and they filmed that closing scene. We're never going to not watch that scene. That's a hell of a day's work. That's immortalized on cinema. It's like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It's, the looking of each other and, oh God, Bergman's going to get on the, plane with Laszlo and, Claude Rains is there with Bogart. And you're just like, it worked then, it works now, it'll work 100 years from now.
Yes.
And that magic of the era we're talking about, I hope we will bring it back, but I also think, thank goodness, it's so easy to stream a lot of the bigger titles now. So I would encourage you to do that. I love this show that you do because I'm a foodie, but I also love that we get to talk about like these amazing humans and keep them alive. And I don't know that some have done it as well. I don't know that anyone's done it better.
Thank you. I just look at food as like I've always said, even if the stars didn't necessarily sit down and make this, I feel like it's a conduit to kind of look at who they were in life, how they lived, maybe where they were from.
Yeah.
There's a lot you can kind of extrapolate just about the humanness of a person based on food.
Yeah.
And I think we should try a meatball.
I think we
meatball
should.
toast to Greta Garbo.
We should. We just put these up.
You're going to be taking home a whole Tupperware thing of meatballs, by the way.
God, I love it. We'll work for food.
Great.
Good job.
I think these turned out really well.
They mostly looked okay. We had to experiment a little bit, y'all.
I'm thinking though, I'm hoping the insides are not pink because I think the outsides got burned a little more than
they got a little more seasoned.
But all right, shall we each I'm trying to find some on the bottom that maybe aren't as super hot at the moment.
Hey. All right. Should we just
let me get you, hang on a sec. Let me go get you a plate. Let me get you a plate.
Excellent.
Okay, here is your
All
meatball.
right, let's see, how do we do?
Put them on a toothpick here.
All right.
Here is my meatball. And to the divine Greta Garbo.
Yay! Cheers.
Yay.
Bing. Bing.
Mmm.
Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Nice.
No.
Mm.
Thank you to everybody for watching. I do have a Patreon if anybody wants to contribute. All proceeds from that go to buy a cookbook, kitchen supplies, food for the episodes. Feel free to share online, and thank you all so much.
Yes,
Tracey.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining our conversation about Garbo.
Yes, and please stay tuned for more food, fun, and film history from
Yay.
Hollywood Kitchen.
Enjoy. Mm. Mm. Mm.